So before the break, we talked about film, we talked about design, we talked about data, magic, and milk. Right now, we're going to talk about ethics, because our next speaker really cares about design ethics. Actually, he's on a mission because he loves society so much. He wants to protect it from designers. He wrote books with titles like "Design is a Job," "You're My Favorite Client," and his last book is here. It's called Ruined by Design. How design has destroyed the world and what we can do to fix it. Please, a thunderous applause for Mr. Mike Monteiro. Hey Mike, good to see you. There you go.
Thanks. Hey, how's it going? My name is Mike Monteiro, and I want to talk to you about some of the things that we've been designing. On April 8th, 2018, BuzzFeed reported that popular gay dating app Grindr, with over 3 million daily active users, was sharing their users' HIV status with 2 other companies. And their status was included in a larger data dump simply because no one thought to not include it. It was designed this way. In 2014, Facebook ran an experiment on 650,000 human beings using their service. They filled their users' newsfeed with overwhelmingly negative news to see if it had an effect on their mental health. Facebook ran a mental health experiment on its users without their consent. Obviously, anyone with mental health issues had no way of opting out of this. Neither did anybody else. By the way, it's estimated that about 15% of the population suffers from depression. 15% of 650,000 is 97,500 people. 97,500 people were put at risk so that Facebook could learn how to target their fucking ads better. In 2015, an African-American software engineer tweeted out that Google's photo AI was categorizing photos of himself and his friends, who were also black, as gorillas. You know how they solved this one? They removed gorillas as a designation. Not only was it designed this way, the problem was so foundational that the only way to actually fix it was to tear the whole thing down, which they refused to do. On February 22nd of 2019, we discovered that period tracking app Flow was telling Facebook when women were having their periods, as well as whether they had stated an intention of getting pregnant or not, and by when. Funny thing about this one is that Flow says they didn't know they were doing it, and Facebook says they didn't know they were getting it. And you know what? I actually believe them. Anybody here work in React? Built by Facebook? Yeah. So a scorpion does what a scorpion's going to do. It collects data, and you can't be surprised when it starts sending data back to the mothership. It's designed that way. In 2014, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency of the US, otherwise known as ICE, awarded Palantir, a Silicon Valley company, a $41 million contract to build a database for keeping track of immigrants. They consider this database absolutely essential to discovering what they call targets. And among those listed in that now operational database are over 2,000 infants forcibly separated from their parents at the border and put in cages as they were applying for refugee status in the United States. This database was built by designers who knew exactly what it was going to get used for and by whom, and they did it anyway. It was designed to work this way. Just last month, Facebook, who is now sadly the world's #1 news provider, decided they would not take down a doctored photo of House Speaker Nancy Pelosi that was altered to make her look like she was drunk and slurring her words. They decided to willingly distribute misinformation. This was by design. And by the way, the Republican Party in the US annually spends about $20 million on Facebook ads. But the real thing I came to talk to you about today is this. Fact. The Jack Dorseys of the world will never change. The Mark Zuckerbergs of the world will never change. The Keith Rabois of the world will be assholes on the day they die. The world was designed for people like this to succeed. And they're succeeding, even as they're destroying the world to do it. And it's easy to blame these idiots for all this crap, and it's also fair. But it's also self-serving, and it omits a big part of the problem. We can accuse these assholes of self-serving inaction, and that's fair. But what's not fair is to call them assholes while cashing their checks. What's not fair is to rail against the horrors of Silicon Valley while implementing those horrors. What's not fair is to believe that we're innocent bystanders to the work that we've done. Now, there's a lot of speakers kind of come up here today, and they're going to make you feel good. I'm not one of them. Because this is the story of where we put our labor. And where we put our labor is a choice. And it's a choice that we should be willing to make with our eyes wide open, fully aware of the repercussions our labor has on society. Who we work for and how we do that work need to be the most important thing that matters to you right now. We designed the shitty interfaces that don't protect our private information. We designed social networks without any way of dealing with abuse and harassment. We designed a financial incentive system that leads Mark Zuckerberg to assert that what's good for the world isn't necessarily good for Facebook, which is an actual quote. And lead Jack Dorsey to believe that engagement is a more important metric than safety. Either by action or inaction, through fault or ignorance, we have designed the world to behave exactly as it's behaving right now. The world isn't broken. It's working exactly as it was designed to work. And we're the ones who designed it, which means we fucked up. There are two words that every designer needs to feel comfortable saying: no and why. These words are the foundation of everything we do. They're the foundation of an ethical framework. If we can't ask Why? We lose the ability to judge whether the work we're doing is ethical. If we can't say no, we lose the ability to stand and fight. We lose the ability to help shape the thing that we're getting paid to shape. Every single one of those examples I showed you earlier could have been stopped by enough people asking why, or saying no, or a combination of both. We're gatekeepers, and nothing should be making it through the gate without our labor and our counsel. We're responsible for the effects of our work once it makes it out into the world. What passes through the gate carries our seal of approval. It carries our name. We're the defense against monsters, and the worst of what we create will outlive us. If it exists, a designer worked on it. If it exists, a designer was okay making it. If it exists, a designer had an opportunity and a responsibility to keep it from existing. We have a skill set that people need in order to get things made, and that skill set includes an inquiring mind and a strong spine. We need to be more than a pair of hands, and we certainly can't become the hands of unethical men. Unfortunately, in Silicon Valley right now, there's no longer any room to ask why. Your job is to move fast. Your job is to break things. How has always been more important than why in Silicon Valley. How fast can we make this? How can we grab the most market share? How can we beat our competitors to market? And the current generation of designers have spent their careers learning how to work faster and faster and faster without any thought to the repercussions that all of this has. And along with speed, we've had to deal with the amphetamine of scale. Everything needs to be faster and bigger. It's no longer good enough to be the best. You need to destroy your competition, burn the sky. Your competitor's an enemy. And obviously this image is a joke because there's no way a woman would ever get that close to power in Silicon Valley. We need to measure more than profit. We need to slow down. We need to measure what our work is doing out there in the world. We need to measure the impact on people whose lives we're affecting. Then we need to start designing things that help improve people's lives. If your product can't make a profit without making poor people poorer, then fuck your product. Twitter saved itself from bankruptcy by allowing fascists to run free and by allowing a 72-year-old racist xenophobe to break every single one of its rules because he was bringing them engagement. Obviously, I'm talking about Donald Trump. In 2018, it paid off financially. They had their first profitable quarter. Jack Dorsey, who's technically an invertebrate, was vindicated. His strategy of turning a blind eye to harassment and abuse while building a giant bullhorn of outrage and white supremacy paid off. Wall Street was happy. Shareholders were happy. Investors were happy. By the standards of capitalism, this was a giant success now. But children were in cages. Immigrants were terrified. Synagogues and mosques were being shot up. And decent people like Heather Heyer was being murdered by goons that Donald Trump was dog whistling from the platform. Is this the system that you want to contribute to? Twitter's profitable quarter came at the expense of democracy, decency, and the safety of the world. And sadly, Jack didn't use his newfound profits to buy himself a spine, but a shovel to dig himself further in. Shortly after being rewarded for designing this garbage fire, he once again was out making a promise about how this time, no, seriously, this time, we're going to do something about abuse and harassment. I don't know how many times he's promised to do that, but I've yet to see one single bit of evidence about it. People don't see the things that they're rewarded for as problems they need to fix. And as much as I'd like to put this entire disgrace at Jack Dorsey's feet, and heaven knows he deserves it, he simply couldn't have executed any of that without the help of everyone working for him. Every single employee working at Twitter in the last few years saw exactly where it was headed. And if they didn't, it's because they weren't looking. And while I don't doubt that there are a few people there trying to do the right thing, trying to right the ship from the inside, you simply cannot correct a problem that management doesn't see as a problem. As Upton Sinclair so eloquently put it, it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends on his not understanding it. Twitter never wanted to understand the problem. Their salaries depended on them not understanding the problem. If Twitter believed it had any kind of problem, they believed they had a PR problem. Twitter employees bore a responsibility to ask why and to say no. When they agreed to work at the company, their job wasn't just to build a tool for the company, but to understand how the company worked and to make sure it wasn't working in any way that was detrimental to society. This is a burden that all designers share. This is the job. The real question, and this is a question I get a lot, is how am I going to pay my rent? Working ethically. The real question is why the hell you'd be willing to work unethically in the first place. You wouldn't tolerate unethical behavior from any professional that you have to deal with in your life. And you want to reserve the right to do it to others? As designers, we have a responsibility to the entire ecosystem that we design within. Our job isn't just to make money for ourselves, although we can't ignore that. Our job isn't just to make money for the people who hire us, although we can't ignore that. And our job isn't just to make things that delight the people who use it, although we certainly can't ignore that. Ultimately, our job is to do all of those things in equal measure, and most importantly, in a way that benefits society as a whole. And when we find ourselves working in an ecosystem that favors one side of that equation over the other sides, it's our job to correct that system. In July of 2018, after ICE started separating refugee families at the US-Mexican border and putting their children in cages, it came to light that Microsoft has subcontracted with ICE on face recognition software that they were using to identify undocumented Americans. And while it's true that Microsoft employees built that software in the first place, when they found out what it was being used for, they drew a line. They got together and they demanded that leadership cancel that ICE contract, and they were successful. The people doing the work have a tremendous amount of power in this situation, and that's you. Now, are there repercussions to this? Absolutely. But the thing is, there are repercussions either way. You might lose your job, sure. But when the work we do can be used to put children in cages, we have to ask ourselves whether that repercussion is more or less terrible than the repercussions that those children face. As the employees of Microsoft found out, you can fight and you can win. On November 1st, 2018, 22,000 Google employees walked out of the job in solidarity. A coordinated effort involving multiple offices in multiple cities on multiple continents. It took time, it took effort, and it took courage. The world noticed, and Google management had their feet held to the fire. Sadly, a few months after the walkout, the New York Times reported that the women who'd organized the workout had been retaliated against at work. So you know what they did? They did it again. They walked out again. Once you wake up a labor force, it is hard to put it down. Once people feel your collective strength, they draw energy from one another. Once you wake up a lioness, you are fucked. If only the employees at Twitter had the same courage, we could have avoided a lot of the shit in the world today. I can draw a very short, very direct line from Twitter not kicking Donald Trump off the service to concentration camps being built in America today. Now, I have no doubt that employees at Twitter are frustrated with how their company is being run. Same goes for employees at Facebook, Google, and even Uber. To think there aren't at least some people there trying to do the right thing is naive. The question isn't why they're there, it's why they stay. Why don't Twitter employees quit? Why don't Facebook employees strike? Why didn't Uber employees kick Travis Kalanick out on his ass sooner? When you work at places like this, you need to know that there's a line that you will not cross. We found out what Microsoft workers' line was. We found out what Google workers' line was. We need to decide what our own line is. And I have to assume that everyone working at Twitter today is okay with everything that Twitter's been doing up till now. And I have to assume that because they're still there. I have to assume that Twitter hasn't crossed the line for them. When I first started doing this design shit, you know, the internet was really exciting. The promise of the internet was that it was going to give voice to the voiceless, visibility to the invisible, power to the powerless. It was supposed to be an engine of equality. Suddenly, everybody could tell their story. Suddenly, everybody could sing their song. Suddenly, that one weird kid in Helena, Montana, could find another weird kid just like them in Bakersfield, California, and they'd know that they weren't alone. Suddenly, we didn't need anybody's permission to publish anything. We could put our stories, our songs, our messages, our artwork where the world could find them. And for a while, it was beautiful, it was messy, and it was punk as fuck. It was, trust me. And then it wasn't. We were the ones who were supposed to guide it there. We failed. We failed because we were naive enough to believe that everyone had the same goals that we did. We failed because we underestimated greed. We failed because we didn't pay attention to history, because everything that's happened today has happened before. We failed because our definition of we wasn't big enough. We designed and built those platforms that undermine democracy across the world. We designed and built the software that's being used to round up immigrants and refugees and put them in cages. We designed the platforms that young, stupid, hateful men use to demean and shame women. We designed and built an entire industry that exploits the poor in order to make rich people richer. That is odious. And some of us pointed out that these things were odious, and we were told that they were making money, so chill the fuck out. The machine that we've built is odious. Not only can we not participate in its operation, nor passively participate, it's now on us to dismantle it. It was built on our watch, and it needs to burn on our watch. Close your eyes for a second. Imagine a world in which Facebook actually vetted the news it was publishing before the 2016 US election. Imagine a world in which Twitter didn't work overtime to normalize the alt-right to save its own bottom line. Imagine a world in which the service economy isn't widening the gap between the rich and the poor. In short, imagine a world where we had done our fucking jobs. Now is not the time for designers to get political. That was yesterday. Now is the time to wake up and fight. And by political, I'm talking about caring about who your work is affecting. I'm talking about caring about who you're including in that work. White boys will always solve problems for white boys first. I'm talking about taking care of people. We have people counting on us to do better. This job isn't about helping Nike sell shoes. It's about making sure that everybody has shoes. This job isn't about creating bullhorns for fascists and others who would use their power to denigrate others. It's about making sure that those who are threatened by their inhumane actions have even bigger bullhorns. This job isn't about building tools that hand our data to the corporations of Silicon Valley. It's about building tools that keep our data from them. This job isn't about making rich white men richer at the expense of everyone else. It's about making sure that everyone is getting an equal share of their labor. How are we going to pay our rent? Tech workers are some of the highest paid workers on the planet. You're not Jean Valjean. You're not a loaf of bread away from your family going hungry. For too long, we've treated this job like we were servants. We did what we were told. We followed orders. We didn't ask questions. We may have rolled our eyes once in a while when something didn't seem right, but we did it anyway. We believed as if we had no say and no agency in how the job was done. We lost control of our labor, our hands, and finally, we lost our minds. So yeah, design is political because your labor is political. Where you choose to expend the limited amount of labor that you have on this dear, sweet, limited amount of time that you have on this dear, sweet planet that we are fucking burning up is a political act. So make it carefully. We're late to the party. The world is working exactly as we designed it to work, and that's the problem. Because we abdicated our responsibility as gatekeepers. We're here because we forgot how much strength we have. But it's time to remember. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Hey.
Man, yeah, I mean, there's nothing that I can ask that can make your message clearer or more effective, so what are we going to do with the books?
Who wants a book?
Okay.
You white dudes, you guys make enough.
You saw it coming. Okay, Mike, thank you so much for taking the time and
thanks, man.
keep spreading the word.
Thanks
Mike
for having
Monteiro,
me.
everyone.